Hello, everybody. This is Zach's at it again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I am honored and thrilled to have on the phone with me my friend Traci Baker. We are actually speaking for the first time on the phone after a number of years with a virtual friendship, and that virtual friendship comes from our mutual admiration for our favorite musician, Mr. Phil Collins. Traci is officially the head of the campaign to get Phil voted in to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an honor that he is very long overdue, and she's also a part of other wonderful Phil Collins campaigns, which we're going to talk about in this podcast. Most importantly, we're going to talk about a wonderful documentary that she has made about a very historic day in music history and in Phil Collins' career, and that was July 13th, 1985, when he performed at both venues for the Live Aid concert in Philadelphia and London. She's made a wonderful 2-hour documentary about that. Please welcome to the podcast my friend Traci Baker. It's such an honor to finally have you doing an interview.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. It's my honor indeed, and I love the work that you have done. I've listened to several podcasts where you've talked with people, friends of mine, or just about things that I find interesting, and so I'm delighted to join you today, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you. So let's talk about how you came to make this wonderful documentary. We want to be sure and let them know how long it took you and the grievances that you got trying to get it available to the public.
Yeah, so just briefly, I am a child of the 80s. I was born in 1969, and my dad was a radio and club DJ in Buffalo, New York, and my mom was a lover of music, and my parents were pretty young. My mom was just 18 when I was born, and my dad was just 20, and I was a 5-year-old, and my mom took me to see David Bowie as a kid, and my parents were super responsible, but just music lovers, and so I got to grow up in that kind of environment. So by the time I was 11, I was seeing my first concert, which was Rick Springfield. I love Rick Springfield. I was a Who fan next, kind of the next stage in my life. I started to love the band The Who when I was about 12 or 13, and they were playing Live Aid, and then I became a Peter Gabriel solo fan. I just loved. I heard his album called Peter Gabriel Plays Live, which was recorded. I can't remember if it's the 82 or 83 tour for Peter Gabriel, but I fell in love with that record and his solo music, and have been a lifelong fan of Peter Gabriel's. Completely separately from my love of Phil Collins, and then Genesis. It's kind of strange. I don't dislike the Peter Gabriel Genesis era. It's just that my first discovery of his music was as a solo artist, and so I kind of explored all of that first. So, and Genesis was always in my life, as a band that I admired, but I didn't become kind of immersed in them at first, right? So, anyway, Live Aid for me was like Mecca. It is. I was the exact right age. I was 16, and I loved MTV. It was the greatest era in music, in my opinion. And all of my favorites were playing, The Who and U2 and Phil Collins and George Michael, Paul McCartney. For me, I couldn't imagine anything better. And had I been just 1 or 2 years older, I probably would have tried to go to one of the shows. And a few years later, 1 year later, in '86, I did go. It's a long story for another time. I went to New York for the weekend without my parents knowing, and I skipped the final exam to go see Peter Gabriel and Pete Townsend at an Amnesty International show at the Meadowlands in New York. And I got in a lot of trouble, but
it was worth it. Brandon Toes did the Drumeo documentary, and he got in because he knew Nick and was friendly with Nick, and Nick arranged it. But absolutely beautiful documentary. Another 2-hour show that's very worth the watch.
Absolutely. And, people have been critical in the fan community, in the Genesis fan community, sort of, of it. Now, look, Brandon and the guys at Drumeo are not professional movie makers. They are professional drummers who have this opportunity to highlight a drumming hero and a genius. And, it's a beautiful piece, and because it's so real, and it's just fan. Brandon's a fan, and he's asking Phil questions. So people just they break my heart when they're critical, and
right.
I just publicly want to tell Brandon I think they did a beautiful job, and I thank him so much.
And I think it is beautifully photographed. I mean, it was incredible. I thought, absolutely terrific, and every drummer that you could ever think of, drummer for Eminem, people that I didn't even know needed drummers were saying I'm the drummer for and Phil Collins had influenced me, and one of the things that got me particular was everybody says Neil Peart, and I've seen Rush, and I got to see Neil do a drum solo before he passed away, and it was incredible. I'm thrilled that we got to do that, but people don't know how much Phil influenced Neil. And Phil, he invented the drum sound of the 80s, as you well know, and he got to talk about the very thing that he wanted to talk about, which was drumming. It was his favorite thing. And that there's a beautiful free ebook that accompanies that documentary. If you can go to a link and download that. And I shared with Brandon the story about, I was 5 years old and couldn't hold a stick in my hand, but my parents bought me this drum set anyway, and so that I could feel like Phil, and Brandon gave it a heart, and I was honored just that he acknowledged that in any way. I would be honored to interview him, but I wouldn't even know how to go about contacting him. But it was an incredible documentary. But it was also then right after I saw that, because I watched it on premiere day, I saw yours, and I thought, because I remember when they wouldn't let you put it on YouTube because you didn't have the rights to the music.
Oh, God, it was the most heartbreaking day, I think, of my whole life, because I had worked for a year solid on putting it together. I had worked so hard, and I began to promote the fact that I'm finally premiering it. And Live Aid was it's like, if there's somebody who could lecture on Live Aid, it would be me. I loved Live Aid my whole life. I mean, I stayed up. We were up in the middle of the night to watch it. My two best friends, these two guys that are still my best friend, we went to my aunt's house because my parents didn't get MTV.
I was just barely out of the NICU, July 13th, 1985, but to see it, I was sitting there hanging on every minute. It was like being there as it was happening and seeing even the font from MTV. I remembered the font when they would put Phil Collins' name up there. I felt like I was watching him on MTV as a little kid again, and it was just absolutely amazing. And to know what a big deal it was, and how Phil was one of the highlighted participants. He was going to be one of the star attractions, and you interrupt me anytime I'm saying something that you'd rather say, but the big points of Live Aid are he was not being arrogant by playing at both venues. There were other people that were supposed to do it, and they backed out, and he stuck with it. He only agreed to play both venues because he said, I'll do it if other people will. And other people said, yeah, we will, and then they pulled out, so he ended up being the only one. Second of all, the crux of it, and you can tell the crux of the whole thing, was the Led Zeppelin reunion, which he played drums on and was excited to do because he worshipped John Bonham. He even hired Jason Bonham at one point when he was considering going back on tour before Nick came in.
Yep.
But he got blamed for ruining Led Zeppelin when it was obvious that Plant's vocals were not where they should be.
Yep.
It's obvious if you hear that, and I think I can say that pretty objectively. And his drumming didn't have any effect on Robert Plant's vocals, and we already knew that Jimmy Page was being belligerent, before he goes on stage, and then he makes the horrible mistake because it's so hot out there that he slips and hits the wrong note at Against All Odds. So after he played it again in Philadelphia, he never played it on piano again. Now he says he's forgotten how. So Phil was giving of his time. It was charitable. Nobody got paid for the gig, I don't think, right? Because it was all for charity.
Yeah.
So he was giving of his time, yet he has been criticized for 40 years for the downfall of that. And when he wrote his autobiography, he was still apologizing for something that he should never have apologized for. I mean, Live Aid was as great and as big as it was because Phil Collins was at the crux of it.
Well, there's so much that I will say. One of the things that I'll just point out that is in the document, I have a clip from actually Trevor Song. He's a fan. Sent it is the band The Cars performing, and in the middle of their set, the broadcast breaks in with footage of Phil Collins landing at JFK Airport. And they interrupt the band The Cars, who were huge at that time, to say that Phil Collins is landing, and that's how massive Phil Collins was. And the other couple of things I want to say is, it's my understanding from talking to many people that know Phil, interviewing them and people that I've become friends with, chatting in life, that he is a sort of type A personality. He is somebody who worries about everything all the time as it his work product. He is the hardest working person. He shows up first for rehearsal and leaves last. He is someone who reads reviews, right? Most musical artists don't even bother. He reads them and he takes them to heart. So he cares so much. So the millions and millions of interviews that I've read and watched over the years, and especially those that I had to do as I researched the documentary and so forth, I think I lived Live Aid. I was 16 years old, and it was my favorite thing, and I stayed up all night to watch it, and I knew everything about it. And from the moment it was broadcast until today, I watch Live Aid still. I love it so much. Phil, I was not aware of anybody who said that Phil Collins was arrogant and he was doing it to get attention. Never in my life did I ever hear that, ever. I never heard that. So I think Phil is hard on himself. I think he is self-deprecating to a fault. So I think when he worries about his finger slipping off the key in London during Against All Odds, I certainly didn't notice it as it happened, as I watched it live. I did not notice it. And he was even worried about when he performed with Sting. There's a part in Every Breath You Take where Sting actually sings the wrong lyrics. And Phil thinks that people notice and we're going to criticize him for it. So at the end of the day, when the incredibly painful Led Zeppelin performance was underway, Phil wanted to leave. He actually wasn't playing most of the time because Tony and the other drummer was not working with Phil. Phil has talked many times about when you have a double drummer situation, it's very important that the double drummers, the guys are working together. Tony Thompson was not interested in that, and it was awful. And only out of Phil's ethics as a human, I think, he didn't leave the stage. But so to have his day end like that was awful. And to this day, if Jimmy Page was sitting here next to me, Jimmy Page would be talking about Phil Collins.
But I mean, yeah, he would be. He still blames Phil Collins.
Jimmy Page, like, give me a break, right?
Right.
So as I was making my documentary, I think my overriding goal with making this documentary that I made was to show that Phil Collins was not anything other than a spectacular human being who gave every bit that he could possibly give, and then some, and that day was one of his most brilliant. Right, so that's what my goal was, and I think my movie does that.
Yes, and I was going to say, and if you watch that and you don't see it, it's because you don't want to see it.
Right. Because I did everything I could to make you see it.
Yeah, and I saw it, and honestly, if you didn't point the things out that that he had already pointed out, and if he didn't point them out, you would never know to look for them.
Exactly, but he's a perfectionist in many ways, and sees these things, and he can't get past them. But none of us saw them, So
we are going to dedicate this episode to the memory of Rodney James Thompson, and I know that Rodney is a lot of your inspiration in what you were doing for Phil Collins, and why you were so diligent in your pursuit, because he was an avid music lover. You and he attended lots of concerts together. So I think in the story that we were at, I think we're going to go in a different direction now, because more than the Live Aid documentary, your campaign to get Phil inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is done specifically with in Rodney's memory. So, do you want to talk about how the Get Phil Voted In campaign started?
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, Rodney passed at the end of April of 21, and I was home in July. My birthday's in early August, and it was just before my birthday. It was July 29th, and I was home, and I had a strange compulsion to listen to Phil Collins and Genesis. And I turned on YouTube on the TV and was just kind of combing through and feeling such nostalgia. And it wasn't that night that I realized it, but a few nights later, I had remembered that when Rodney was in the hospital for the last time, he had, the chemo was actually crashing his liver. He had another health issue that compromised his liver medication and things. So he kept having to go to the hospital after each chemo episode, which was pretty awful. And can you bring my iPad? This was the last time, this was a few days before he actually passed. I said, sure, honey, what do you want to listen to? He says, I want to hear Phil Collins. I said, anything specific? Like he has a huge catalog? Nope, just Phil Collins. Okay. So I played it, and I have a great video of him in his hospital bed with his chemo little bag strapped to him in the hospital gown, dancing to You Can't Hurry Love. And he's only doing the backing parts, the ooh, in the background, and he falls asleep while singing because the cancer is, taking his life while we're watching,
Sure.
And it's this most amazing video because he's still, he got his shoulder was moving and dancing, and he was still him, even though he was emaciated and dying. He's only going to be on the planet for a few more days after that. And I think that made this huge impression on my consciousness and my soul. And
so that is when you fell in love with Phil.
I was always a fan, but there was something happened in me that day. And I don't know what it is. I tell the story all the time, and it's crazy. Yeah, sorry. It's just
no. I'm crying with you. So don't. That's absolutely beautiful and haunting and terrible, and my heart goes out to you.
I had learned that Phil wasn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at some point in my life, and I said, just witnessed on the Genesis tour was a man who was beloved by millions, and it's an egregious oversight and absolutely unjust that Phil Collins is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. And I just had all of these ideas, and I jotted them down. I had an idea for the logo and the hashtag and just all of it, and I could see it in my mind, and I just did it. I started the page, I created the logo, I got a website, I did a YouTube channel, I did Instagram, and I have been so committed, and it has been incredible ride, and I hope that he gets in this year.
Do you know Yvonne Roberts by any chance?
I know Yvonne. In fact, Yvonne was one of 3 ladies that I reached out to do a little, kind of a council meeting, so to speak, because they had, she and Kathy Steffen and Lisa Urban, all, and Linda Carmine, those ladies had tried to do a campaign. And
I was in that group. I was in Yvonne's group. I sure was.
Yeah, and so Yvonne is a dear person and a lovely spirit, and so they gave me advice, and I reached out and asked them for help, but I realized that I couldn't rely on anybody else. I had to do it myself.
Yep.
Kathy ultimately kind of stuck by my side. Not that the other ladies didn't, but she was willing to take a step back, knowing that I had this intense vision, and that it had to be my way. And I'm very, very purposeful in that my page is done with kindness. I don't let any nonsense. I don't have people parents or his family,
people or other fans.
Right, exactly. I don't have any of it, and so I think there are people who think I'm a little bit of a rigid person, but I
let them think it.
Well, sure. In my personal life, you meet me and sit in my house, you're going to find out I'm crazy and lots of fun. But when it comes to something like the campaign, I've got the possibility of Phil Collins' family, his kids, his friends, his management, and members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominating committee that might come on my page. And at no time will I ever have them see some woman talking about Phil Collins' butt or, speaking about his ex-wife or something. It's just not ever going to happen. So I run that kind of page, and people love it. We're almost at 20,000 members, and people are very happy on my page. I've got 3 great moderators that keep the spammers off, and we have a wonderful time being kind to each other and loving and recognizing Phil Collins' work. So it's really nice. The people that started the Rock Hall, Jan Wenner was one of them, and he was the publisher of Rolling Stone magazine. Jan stepped away from the nominating committee a few years ago, and then eventually there's a board of directors he stepped away from. But many people believe that Jan set the tone for the Rock Hall and their attitude. And the attitude is, to a certain extent, that if you are commercially successful, that you suck, that you're not worthy of recognition. And there's very few people who have been as commercially successful as Phil Collins.
Exactly.
There's a much cited statistic that, people talk about all the time, but there are 3 artists that have sold, 100 million plus records as a solo artist and a member of a band. And that's Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney, and Phil Collins. So that's a pretty amazing company to be in. But, anyway, I could carry on for days about the Rock Hall, but there's a little snobbery. The Rock Hall is changing, I think, their image. They are trying to be perceived less snobby, I think, less artsy types and more, and they're including country artists and hip hop and rap artists, and people have a problem with that because it's not quote unquote rock and roll, but it's really music, and music takes all forms. So, I admire the Rock Hall for trying to evolve and change, but they have to recognize Phil because, it's my mission.
Yeah, and if you look on it, not just your list, but everybody's list of the most overlooked people in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Phil Collins tops every list I've looked at. Dozens of them. And, people in general know that he should be there. Everybody knows that he should be there. And, one of the founders, or at least I think, and you will certainly correct me if I'm wrong, Ahmet Ertegun was big into, the founder of Atlantic Records was big into founding this. He is the man who signed Phil in 1981.
That's right. levels. And Ahmed Oregon for sure. And recently John Sykes, who's the chairman of the nominating committee, or the chairman of the board, I can't remember which. He has actually come out and said that he believes Phil, of course, is deserving and has been, discussed and so forth. But it's just they have these negotiations, and people fiercely fight for their artists, and so even the chairman, said so. I think with the Dromio interview, with the impact that I firmly believe my campaign has made over the last 3 years,
Amen.
I believe it will be Phil's year. If it's not, then I'm going to keep on, and I'm going to do more, and I'm going to, try harder.
Until it is.
Yeah.
Until it is. Well, lots of love to you, and God bless you for what you're doing, and thank you for giving me your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for, talking with me today, and I'll do it again anytime you need me to.
Well, I hope you've had a chance to say what you want to say with this, because, like I said, I do talk a lot too, so I hope...
Well, I like the opportunity to just talk about Phil and share my stories, and so we did that today, and that's beautiful, and thank you. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you.